You are listening to Russia on the Record, a podcast from the Moscow Times. This week, we're going to find out more about recent developments in Chechnya. But first, as ever, here's what else has been going on in Russia. A court has extended the pre-trial detention of two lawyers who were arrested on extremism charges for working with the late opposition leader Alexei Navalny. When Navalny's political network was declared extremist in 2021, anyone associated with it was put at risk of criminal prosecution. This includes Ksenia Fadeyeva, a Tomsk City Council deputy who served as Navalny's coordinator in the region. She lost her appeal against a 9-year prison sentence this week. A Ukrainian journalist who went missing while trying to enter the Russian-occupied Zaporizhia region 9 months ago is being held in custody in Russia, according to the National Union of Journalists of Ukraine. The father of Victoria Roshchina learned of his daughter's status through a letter from the Russian Defense Ministry. However, it did not indicate where she was being held, and the International Committee of the Red Cross later learned that nobody could access Roshchina. The EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, says Ukraine has the right to use Ukrainian weapons to strike targets on Russian territory. The issue has come to the forefront in recent weeks as the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv and its surrounding region have been bombarded by bombs and missiles launched from across the Russian border. The US is still holding out in granting permission, even as the head of NATO and other countries allied to Kiev have urged Washington to change its stance. During a recent trip to Uzbekistan, Putin warned of serious consequences if Western weapons were used to attack Russian territory. Moscow's Human Rights Commissioner has accused Ukraine of blocking future prisoner of war exchanges with far-fetched demands, although she didn't specify what these were. Kiev says around 3,000 Ukrainian prisoners of war have been returned thus far. Russia reports a similar number as the countries follow a one-for-one policy. And Moldova has granted citizenship to 9 members and crew of the Russian-Belarusian rock band B2 after they were nearly deported from Thailand to Russia for performing without the correct documents. The band, which has been performing outside of Russia since the invasion of Ukraine, feared legal persecution in Russia because of their history of making anti-war statements. The Republic of Chechnya in the North Caucasus, where human rights abuses are rampant even by Russian standards, frequently makes even international headlines. From speculation about the health of its leader, Ramzan Kadyrov, to the line of succession and the power plays within its own leadership, it can take a lot to keep track of what's really going on. Analyst Harold Chambers, who specialises in the security of the region, joined us this week to make sense of the recent developments.
How would you say Chechnya in general has changed since the invasion of Ukraine?
I would say Chechnya has changed a lot of ways since the invasion of Ukraine. Some of that is due to the invasion. Some of that is not due to the invasion. Obviously, going on coincidentally or coinciding with the invasion, not going on coincidentally necessarily. You have Kadyrov's children coming of age. You have all of these officials' children coming of age. And so you have this dynamic of generational transition within Chechen politics at the same time that you have the ongoing invasion. And frankly, the invasion has certainly helped aid this transition, as, what was it? I believe it was in the fall of 2022. We saw Kadyrov's 3 sons go to Ukraine. His eldest daughter, Aishat, has been hugely involved in sort of the shipments from the Akhmat Kadyrov Fund of so-called humanitarian aid, and also just general shipments to the front. And so it's sort of this pairing of, Chechnya's substantial contribution to the war effort that we sort of have seen paired with this start of this very sincere start to a turnover in who is actually controlling Chechnya.
And kind of since the beginning of the war, and before then, actually, there have been these rumors that have gotten more widespread every time about Kadyrov's health and whether or not he's incapacitated secretly. So I guess as it stands now, what can we say about all of this speculation?
On his health, I have to say I'm probably one of the people that's the most sort of just like, who cares? Like, yes, it matters for the sake of like the day after and how close are we to the day after. But at the same time, frankly, whatever he actually has does not actually matter. And it matters less than especially if some of the rumors are true and he did get it from overuse of narcotics and such. Like, that matters more than the fact that he is, terminally ill. Like, he was always going to die someday. There's a robust team of managers that is, well, actually, frankly, a little bit more shaken up at the moment with the exit of former Prime Minister Muslim Huchiev. But, like, there's a robust team of managers that control and help run not just the formal politics, but the informal politics in the Republic and elsewhere primarily being, Adam Delemhanov. And so, I don't know, it's one of those things where it's like, it matters in some ways, but frankly, it's way overly sensationalized, in part because he is just this, well, sensational figure, as well his no longer existing Instagram used to be a testament to. And, his long historic lifestyle with wild cats and luxury cars and insane mansions. So it's one of those things where it's just, there's sufficient enough of a team within the regime that, at least for now, it's a bit over fixated upon the exact status of his health rather than, what's actually going on, in my opinion.
So would you say that the fact that Kadyrov's children are stepping into government roles and being appointed to more positions, would you say that's more of just something that's always been part of the plan because they're his children and he appoints all his family to government positions? Or, as many people suspect, it's more to do with him looking at a more short-term successor?
Yeah, so this is like perfect case in point. They're turning 18. They would be integrated regardless of his health. Now, the thing is whether or not his health is going to accelerate the pace of their progression through the ranks. But, like, they were always going to be brought in as soon as possible. We saw this with all 4 of the eldest daughters, who are all older than the sons. They were all integrated in different capacities, and they continue to progress at slower rates than the sons, obviously, but in certainly no less important roles, realistically. But it's just the sons were always going to move at this pace. And, like, obviously, frankly, Chechnya just operates differently. Certain Russian laws don't necessarily matter there. So, like, yeah, it's not that surprising that Akhmat his eldest son got married at the age of 17, which is illegal in Russia. Like, this is just, frankly, something that happens in Chechnya. And so, the kids would be moving up anyways, and we would be seeing these shufflings. We might see it at maybe a little less quick of a pace, but it would still be happening regardless of whether or not he's sick, just because they're coming of age, like, these are things that are sort of have their own set schedules. And so, yeah.
And as for, the reshuffles in the government itself, last week, Magomed Dadov was, he abruptly resigned from the Chechen parliament speaker role. What can we say about that? Is there some kind of bigger significance?
So with this whole flurry of reshuffling, so it was obviously there was a full clearing of a path, basically, that's going on, which is also why we saw the Minister of Sport and Physical Culture, be made a advisor to Kadyrov, so that way his son Akhmat could move there, and there was the whole reshuffling among the ministers. And then Huchiev left, so Daudov could move into his spot, but we still have yet to see who's going to emerge as the actual replacement for Daudov, not just in an acting capacity. And it's still a complete mystery why the heck this happened now. Like, this was a lot of movement, didn't need to all happen like this. Obviously, we still don't have the full picture because not all of the positions have been filled, but there's no real explanation for what exactly prompted this to happen. And of course, certainly the timing is just very odd, coinciding with the current, still ongoing purge of the Ministry of Defense, which comes right at the end, right after, Putin puts together his new government. And so there's a lot of reshuffling going on. Some of it, people have tried to read into it, this instability in Chechnya, which I don't think there's really much of an actual argument for that beyond a superficial level. But as far as an actual motivation goes, for all of this stuff happening at once, it is not out in the open, whatever it is. Like, maybe it was just, Kadyrov woke up and said, yeah, let's do it. but it does not make sense. Like, Mohammed Daudov was posting as normally literally that morning, hours before he resigned. His son was actually just made Akhmat Kadyrov's deputy over in Ministry for Youth Politics, like a week or so before. So, like, it's very strange, and there's really no actual clear reason for why this stuff happened now.
In the Western media, at least, the Kadyrov regime is presented as a very like totalitarian one-man rule kind of thing. So I'm curious, how much of a role do these officials actually play in day-to-day governing of the region?
I think one of the biggest things is to remember that Chechnya, like Russia at large, is a dual state. So you have a formal politics and an informal politics, basically. Frankly, I have totally lost track of how many advisors Kadyrov has, and it's very clearly just, hey, I need to make this relative or this person, keep them in government. But, like, what are they actually doing? It's very clear that they're not doing anything real. And so, or at least they're not doing anything clear that we're seeing. So clearly they're doing other stuff. Like, Ramzan Kadyrov has been an advisor for the security bloc for, I don't know, a long time now. But, like, what is he actually doing? It's not clear. And so it's one of these things where, yes, there are the formal roles played. So, like, Daudov in his previous role as Speaker of Parliament, like, yes, he has his strict role as Speaker and making sure Kadyrov, whatever policies Kadyrov wants, gets moved through Parliament. But more than that, he was the one that was supposed to be maintaining security and stability in Chechnya. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, he's still Silovik down there, working with Abu Zaid Vismuradov to make sure that people get abducted and killed and tortured and all of that. And so that's that's a good big reason why he's still there and why he didn't get moved out. And so I think this is one of those things where there's multiple sides, and I think it's a criminal enterprise. It's just blatantly a criminal enterprise, the Kadyrov regime. I mean, they're basically running a republic-wide racketeering scheme on their own citizens. That's how the Akhmat Kadyrov Fund is built. Embezzle federal funds. They extort from businessmen throughout Russia, and that's frequently run by Adam Delimanov and his associates. So it's one of these things where there's a lot, like, yes, there are actual concerted roles and actually engaging in policy, which it's difficult to know quite how much leeway, but certainly there's stuff that's telegraphed down. And so you just sort of know, like, yeah, we work towards this, but they also seemingly have, like, they're, to some degree, some of their own autonomy.
Given the fact that so little of any of this, of what goes on in the regime, is publicly known, and probably never will be, your job is to analyze and study what's happening in the region and its politics. So how do you kind of reconcile with kind of that contradiction?
With great annoyance, typically. I mean, it's one of those big things where, to a certain degree, you just make your peace with the fact that there's high levels of being opaque. There are certainly, thankfully, over the past several years now, have been some pretty solid development of digital civil society, digital resistance groups. Ada, NISO, Memorial still somehow is managing to reasonably maintain a presence in the Republic from elsewhere. Vifond maintains a presence to a certain degree in the Republic. You have these different groups that are still able to communicate some of what is going on. I mean, just over the past couple of days, there have been a lot of revelations about a lot of people who were abducted last year were sent to the front to Ukraine, and they're now coming back. This is one of those things where, like, yes, there are rumors. Now we're getting stronger confirmations of this. But, it's one of these things where it's really sort of combining sort of, the Kremlinology that goes on with the watching very specific individuals and rumor mills, and just gradually being able to parse out, okay, what's most likely right, what's most likely wrong, and sort of how could something be possible? So, like, the rumor that Mohammed Daudov was going to become the governor of Ingushetia, like, a lot of people were just like, this would be absurd, and they're correct, it would have been an absurd move, but there's still a high degree of logic to it in terms of, Daudov's. And that speaks to a lot of different things. Kadyrov desperately wants Ingushetia to be he wants control. not just sort of informal influence, but he desperately wants it to be back a part of Chechnya like it was during the Soviet period. So that would be a de facto annexation. Ingushetia currently has a bit of a problem with ISIS. So Daudov, as the person who oversaw counterterrorism regime in Chechnya, would be set up for that. You know, Kadyrov reasonably has gotten some rewards for his wartime efforts. And so, so you can see that there would be a logic to it, even though it didn't come to fruition. And reasonably, even though he's now blamed Ingush provocateurs, the rumors were started by regime-aligned media of his. Like, it was very clear he was trying to get it. And so, to a certain degree, it's just trying to take in as much information as you can, understand what the logics are for something to happen, and then basically just waiting and seeing what's going to happen, which, is probably the more difficult part because people don't like waiting to find out. They just want to spring on whatever the most sensational first thing is. But
going back to this bargain that the Kremlin made after the end of the Chechen wars, basically not writing a blank check, but giving them generous funding and expecting loyalty and stability in return. Based on what you've said, it sounds like if Kadyrov were to step down or die, that would basically remain the case.
Yeah, I think to a certain degree, he's been around and he's been such this massive figure for so long that it's easy to forget the fact that the deal wasn't even made with him. Ramzan wasn't the one who the deal was struck with. His father was. And so he was assassinated, and you entered a period of sort of high political distress, and Ramzan emerged victor at the end of the day, mostly because of his personal relationship with Putin. And then he was just merciless in the aftermath once he became actual head and he got rid of everybody. But a lot of that stuff, it hasn't necessarily been let go. Not by the security services in Moscow, who all of their patrons were killed, basically. One of my favorite things of pettiness is the acting head, Alu Alkhanov, who thought, for whatever reason, that he could actually beat Kadyrov, Ramzan, to become that next become the actual head of Chechnya. So when he lost, he went up to Moscow, basically in self-exile. Yeah, his son is now married to one of Kadyrov's daughters. And so it's just full co-optation, and it's just that is frankly a beautiful display of political pettiness there from Ramzan to force that marriage. So it's one of these things where Kadyrov's going to do what he's going to do, and he wasn't the one who the original deal was made, but then he rewrote the deal by eliminating any potential rival. And in terms of securing the future, yes, he's making certain personnel moves, but frankly, he's also co-opted a lot of families. And we've seen, and you see this mostly, well, thus far with the daughters. So, they've married in a bunch of, the Vismuratovs have now been married in, Alkhanovs have been married in, and a couple other not as connected families. So it's one of these things where he's very basically furthering this conglomeration of potential challenging families. And he's basically just marrying them into his own. So it's another sort of move. Yeah.
But we also see Chechen security forces kind of acting extrajudicially throughout the rest of Russia, like abducting people who have left Chechnya to go to St. Petersburg or Nizhny Novgorod and returning them back forcefully. So I guess I'm curious, what is the level of tolerance for this in Moscow? And are they basically just tolerating it because the other alternative is more violence in Chechnya?
Yeah, in terms of this entirely extrajudicial operations by the Kadyrovtsi outside of Chechnya, there are definitely levels to it, both in terms of the personnel being used. And by that, I mean, you have, your formal Kadyrovtsi inside of actual command structures, but then you have your informal Kadyrovtsi, who are either former officials or would make up the bulk of that. And so this is one of the things, and except for a few cases, these renditions are not necessarily being done by current actual Kadyrovtsi units. They might be overseen by them, but they're not necessarily actually being done. And I can't remember who actually abducted Zarema Musayeva, mother of the Yamadeyev boys, who have given him an awful lot of trouble. But whenever a lot of the incidents we see, there's a degree of separation. And at least in terms of the Kremlin's perspective, if it's against Chechens, they don't care. It's fully sort of Chechensky Mir. Anything to do with the Chechens, Kadyrov, yep, you're all good, you'll do whatever, which is like the recent case of Leah Zarpakova. She was abducted by Moscow police and then held. And this is a pattern we see, whether it's usually in Moscow or St. Petersburg, where local police apprehend and then just hold until Kadyrovцы get there, and then they're brought back to Chechnya. And so that's sort of like the main difference. Obviously, there have been, an abundance of cases not directed at Chechens, the bulk of which is mostly just intimidating critics into giving apologies of various politicians around Russia. But obviously, we have a string of assassinations that are the work of the Kadyrov as well. So there are certainly exceptions to some of these rules, but there are generally understood sort of guidelines for how they can operate and what's acceptable outside of Chechnya.
And then I guess for any looking at the line of succession, I guess, as it were, if Kadyrov is out of power, would any of these children be viewed with any kind of credibility, or would they just kind of be like basically puppets who are holding a place and letting Kadyrov's other officials kind of do the job?
Part of this does depend how long he's alive for, because of the age needed to be, they're still very far away from being old enough to actually become the head of the republic. And so there would have to be a placeholder, as there was for Ramzan. But like, this isn't just a few years. This is, right now, like decades, basically. And so that is definitely part of the calculus. And I don't think that he thinks that any of them are like, oh, they could take over tomorrow. Like, they're still very much building their brands, so to speak. I would say that it's still very early in the game to sort of gauge how stuff is playing out here. And I say that because obviously I think probably the loudest player in the succession game here so far has been Adam Kadyrov, who is 16 years old. And, it's very loud what he does, in part because he's trying so very hard to emulate his father. But there's a lot of, Akhmat has been silently moving up, and he actually does things. He's not just doing symbolic leadership of different security service roles where it's like, which I don't understand why they're doing that for Adam. You would think that Ramzan would have learned his lesson, although I guess he feels like there's no assassination threat to him, seeing as he was in charge of his father's security. But so the current dark horse right now, Ali Kadyrov, 0 appointments, 0 real regime engagement until, frankly, today, that is known, literally as of this morning. He's been play acting his competitive fighting career. He's 17, turns 18 in December. Hasn't really been anywhere. He went to Ukraine, all right. Other than that, hasn't done anything really. So it turns out he actually went with Kadyrov and the rest of the Chechen delegation on Putin's visit to Uzbekistan. And so this has actually been starting to bug me, as over the past few days, we've been starting to get the readouts from the officials of, what were they discussing? And basically, there's been certain language that I've been looking for because of Uzbekistan's location and what the regime has sort of previously been doing. I've been looking for the language that signifies, okay, we went and we talked about the regional situation with ISIS. There's been none of that. It's just been all, brotherly relations. And basically, the historic tour of Akhmat Kadyrov Sr.'s, educational stint in Uzbekistan, which has not really made sense until today, when it was revealed that, Ali Kadyrov is with us. And does not look like, well, frankly, 12, which is how he used to look. And it's just like, okay, so this makes more sense. So, so he has his picture with him, Ramzan, and Putin. He's part of a state visit. There's also obviously the Akhmat Kadyrov connection, which is always a big plus in their books. And so this is the first time that we're really seeing something from him, which has been very, very blatantly missing. So I don't know, we're still very early days in terms of any actual, successor competition.
Before Kadyrov came to power, but definitely since he's become ruler, the region has just seen a complete decline in human rights and freedoms. Is there any reason to suspect that would change at all if someone else is in power, like a post-Stalin thaw?
I don't think so. And that's partially because just generally in Russia, we're seeing such a decline even further on rights and everything. And so there's reasonably not going to be any real changes that I would see. After Kadyrov, it might change some depending on who becomes the next head. Like, based on temperaments displayed so far, Adam Kadyrov would be just as bad. Maybe Akhmat would, I don't know, normalize the Republic some. And by obviously normal here is still massive repression and no human rights. But no, I just it's extremely bleak to say, but just within the current system, I just don't really see any path forward until there's an actual systemic level change taking place.
Thank you for listening to Russia on the Record, and a special thank you to everyone who's been with us from the start. We're retiring this podcast, but that doesn't mean we're going to be stepping back from covering Russia. Quite the opposite. So don't forget to follow the Moscow Times on all social media platforms and visit our website, where you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter to get the most important news and analysis of each week direct to your inbox.